Hi everyone, and welcome back to Parkitect. I'd like to thank everybody that watched the last video and gave me some really good suggestions on what I should try to do for the next video as well as up and coming series. So I will try to keep on improving and get some of the suggestions in there. Starting with today, hopefully I'd like to add some ride POVs at the end of the video. But without further ado, let's get right in. Today's scenario is Chanute Airfield. It's a small airfield that has been abandoned and now its land has become available for use. This looks like an ideal spot for an amusement park if you can work with limited space. The old airport structures are landmarks and you cannot destroy them, they need to be preserved. This scenario has one requirement that is at least 250 guests in your park and two optional requirements, which are to sell at least 400 park tickets over the course of, I guess, the 2 years that we have, or a year and a half, June year 2. So let's hop in. Alright, well, since the last episode started a little slow, I thought this time it would be a perfect opportunity to take on head on what I was kind of afraid to do in the last one, which was let's build a coaster right away and let's make a station for it. And I will kind of admit that the station that I build here is not really a true station. I mean, I kind of hide it behind the fact that it's like a hangar. I do like the way that it turned out. I'm extremely happy with it, but it might be slightly cheating because it doesn't feel like a true traditional coaster station. But I mean, in my opinion, that's fine because it matches the theme of what's going on here in the park. The fact that this was an old abandoned airfield, and although it might be a little bit too close to the runway, so it's not too terribly realistic. And I could have probably bought some land behind the fence there to really give us some more room. I think it works out in the end, and I really like the aesthetic for it. Like the whole thought process behind it, which you'll see here in a few seconds, is I really want to have elements of the coaster that would tie through the building. And I think I did a fairly decent job of that. It gave me some struggles right at first when I didn't really know how I was going to do that, but especially with the pieces, that's something that I'm still getting used to, is the different pieces and sets that you have, and some parks are different than others, so that'll take some time to get used to, but I am starting to get more fluid with the building, and that will only result in better time lapses, I hope. So it'll take less time to do things, which means less transitions and cleaner time lapses, like I said. So that's an exciting thing. But the first coaster that we are building is just a standard junior coaster. I believe we built one of these in the last park, although I did not really realize how tall the coaster should be. So this time I tried to do a little bit more research into it and actually look at what kind of elements does this coaster have in real life, which a junior coaster does not have many. As you can tell by the builder, if you can look on your screen, there's no loops. There's no, I mean, I guess helixes technically, but there's no vertical loops. There's no real rolls or anything like that. So, it's... You have what it'll give you. That's basically all it is. And here's kind of what I talked about, where we really go up and over the coaster station. And it gave me a little bit of trouble because the vertical walls are a little bit tall, or the round walls of the hangar are a little bit tall. So what I decided to do, and you'll see here in a few seconds, is that I cut the wall in half. And so the hangar looks really, really good from one angle. And I mean, it'll probably look okay from the others, but from where the park left off, there's no pathways going back there, and that's kind of what theme parks do anyways. It looks good from one or two viewing angles, the main angles that you want them to see, and from the rest, it looks just kind of okay, and I'm okay with that. So this ride actually did throw me through a loop as well, because it crashed a number of times, and so I guess my streak with junior coasters or kid coasters just continues with poor luck. It was significantly better than the last one, I will say that. But it did crash a few times, and it's actually because when I was doing some edits here and trying to make things smooth, not on this little second turn, but on the last turn before going into the helix, one of the pieces that was smoothing actually did not connect. So it looked like it did, but if you zoomed in really closely, the two track pieces did not meet up right, so it did not work. The other thing that I was really interested to do was kind of like how some dark rides and kind of like Area 51 in Kings Island has for... Again, it is like a indoor coaster, right? This is not an indoor coaster, but that one is. It has a lot of theming into it. I didn't really do any interior building details. If that's something that you'd like to see, let me know, but it might be a little bit difficult too, because the walls definitely cover up things. So I'd have to build the inside first and then the outer walls, I guess. But I wanted to have some indoor kind of theming with the queue path going through, and a lot of it's just mental imagination, right, and gymnastics. But I like how that turned out, and then I wanted to have like the exit path coming out, go kind of between some buildings, which we'll build later on. I also really like what I did here with the glass. I like that it feels like you're coming out the hangar and getting ready to take off, and one of the coasters we do later kind of continues that thought process, except for it's on the tarmac. And that was the other big thing too. I really wanted to keep the tarmac or the runway as clean as possible. I do end up covering it slightly later on down the line, but for the most part, it stays pretty clean, and I like that. And here's that design. And I think that having the glass, even though it cuts down lower and so it doesn't look like a true hangar across the entirety of it, the glass really does help, I think. Especially because if you can picture yourself in the ride, just getting ready to go, and this one only has one train. So if let's say I had the second brake run in, getting ready to go and maybe seeing a train like come over the station, or even like while you're just waiting and there is only one, let's say only one train on the track, and you're in like the queue line waiting, I think that would build the anticipation up a lot. Going up, being able to like look up and just see the train over top of you. Personally, I think that'd be pretty cool. I also struggled with horizontal like beams and stuff like that, like right kind of at first, but as you'll see like later in the video, I stole a little bit of architecture and design from what was already there. I mean, I guess if it's there, use what you have, right? So I used some of the inspiration that I'm not entirely sure who designed this level. I'll have to look that up, and maybe next episode that'll be some cool information to have. But whoever designed this level, they gave us some pretty nice buildings. I think most of them are traditional. Like I kind of think of it as like Air Force Base Museum or like history museum ish type buildings. I would say the building with the tower on the top, the communications tower. I'm not entirely sure. Is very Air Forcey and almost like naval. Actually, it kind of reminds me of like the top of a Air Force carrier. But alas, they gave me some pretty good ideas of what I wanted to do, and that's what I'm going to kind of do right now, which is building my first building. I'm going to try and start doing this theme, which is having the interior shops a step back, because in the last park we had like the fronts of the buildings kind of sticking through the parts, and I didn't like that as much. I wish what I would have done here though is get rid of those like side walls and then have the buildings kind of facing the back, because people in the park complained a lot about like the carriers carrying goods right in front of them. It really took them out of their disbelief, and I guess give Disney props for that, because that's something that's been challenging to do, especially with like a monetary flow, because you can't run everything underground. I know Disney does do some, pipes underground that carry goods and stuff, but definitely not like the easiest thing to do, and something that I will try to do in the next park, or at least if I flip those buildings around so that they're facing the back, I can stick one of like the like some staff paths behind it. And I actually do try to do that, but since I didn't have the buildings rotated, it made it a lot more difficult. So I guess it's just learning steps. And I mean, another really big learning step here was that I didn't understand how the color picker worked. I thought the color picker was that you could select the first thing and then select the second thing and then pre-select colors. Well, that's not entirely true. So it's a palette. So you can save palettes of colors, but they will always have like the same first, second, third, or I guess primary, secondary, tertiary, and whatever comes after that colors. And so the only way to select that second color is to like manually drag the slider around, and you can't actually like color select. If there is a way to do that, please let me know, because that would be really, really helpful. But as far as I can tell right now, there is not that functionality. And as a result of that, the windows and the doors and like the borders there are just a little bit different in color. Another thing that I did that I thought was really cool was, and something that I wanted to incorporate too, because I really like it when I see it in real theme parks, was the little path like covers that keep you safe from when you're walking underneath the roller coasters. I think that adds just an extra little depth of realism. And now we are on to the second ride in the park. Although it's not like a roller coaster per se. Well, actually, let me take a step back. Third ride in the park because the airplane flat ride is actually the second one. But this is going to be the third ride in the park, which is the car ride. I thought it fit right in. I really wanted the park to kind of feel like a history museum. With lots of outdoor aspects. I mean, I guess in almost entirely outdoor aspects in this case. But I really like that feel. And the old car ride, it was a great selection from whoever designed the park. And it really just fits in with the overall aesthetic of everything. And the only thing I could think of was that Cedar Point used to have a few of these. I think they still have one. I don't think Kings Island has any more that I can remember off the top of my head. But it was something that I always remembered going on with my grandparents as a kid. And so it just always has a really fond memory in my mind. And it's something that I just, once I saw that it was there, I had to include. And I think that the layout that I did is pretty traditional. I would rather have like the overhead come after that first little like roundabout, have it go over top of the track, and then I was gonna have it loop around and kind of just like go up on like the elevated part um, after it passed over, or right before it passes over the starting line, and then continue over the path. That way, it was easier to walk. But it worked out in the end because this little like pavilion I was able to put in on the back side, I really liked and was my favorite parts of the park. So all's well that ends well, and some things just work out for the best. All right, and this is where I think we actually get to our second of three little building sets that I put together. And this one I copied the architecture of the first entrance building, and I would imagine that if this was a real park, that the older buildings on like the right side were kind of there and they were existing when the park first opened, and so they kind of turned those buildings that might have been airfield buildings to begin with into more park buildings, but they left them standing. Whereas these buildings that we're building right now, and the buildings that you'll see here in a little bit, are newer ones. So these are ones that were probably an expansion to the park. Maybe not this one up front, but definitely the one at the end. And so the park might have started off a little bit smaller, and then as it picked up interest, because people liked the fact that they were using this land and this historic site for good use, and that let's just pretend that the park managers were good people and um, were giving back to the community. They were able to raise enough money to make the expansion for the park and build some of the bigger rides that we're going to see later on. And I like to think about that kind of backstory in my head. So that's what we're going to go with. The kind of that first the first kind of smaller flat rides might have existed there to begin with, and maybe let's say the coaster on like the right side, but the more left hand side of the park is like the newer expansions, and I kind of like that. Um, Another thing talking about like the roller coasters and things is that I was really excited to show you guys the POVs of the rides. I had not played before, and it's been a while since I've watched some of the videos on it, so I didn't really remember what the POVs look like of the rides, and they are cool, but they're not exactly the same as like Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 or Planet Coaster, and no fault of their own. It's its own aesthetic, and I like it, and I would not change it. But it may not be the best for showing off rides going forward. I did include it this time. It added on like an additional minute and a half to this video, and the video is already pretty long as is. So if you do not like them, I will not include them. But at the end of the video, please leave a comment. Just let me know if you like the ride POVs, and I will either continue to have them or cut them out, or maybe shorten the video to include them if you like that. And here's this third little outcropping of buildings that I was actually able to get like an employee path to and kind of sneak it in slightly here. I really like how that turned out. And I'm going to try to do more of that later down the line, which is just get employee paths to the buildings to kind of provide that Disney-ish disconnect between where are the operations of the park actually going and where is like the fan and patron, I guess is the proper word for it, sight lines and aspects. And I like the color schemes that I used. I think I actually ended up getting rid of those like curved roofs on the top because they turned out kind of ugly, and I liked that better. The flat roof with the kind of like blue tiling. I'm not sure. I guess it's just paneling. It looks a lot better. And something I forgot to mention in the past couple times when we were showing the video clips was that those borders. I finally found horizontal borders. I think the last one had them too, and I just did not really realize what the best way to use them. But looking at the architecture from whoever designed this map, it really helped me figure out like how was the best way to use the borders, and I think it helped all the buildings turn out well. And I actually used them as paths too, which is probably their main usage. So it wasn't like a novel concept. Use them for the paths, but turning them white and then having them walk along all the runway or the walkways as well as like the flower beds, which you'll see here in a second that I built. I think it really like just makes it click and stand out just a little bit more, and I really like that kind of aspect of the park, um, or the aesthetic rather of the park really sits well with me. And there also is that little um, not roofing but pavilion ish. Oh gosh, covering that hopefully will protect you in case someone has their phone on the ride and it falls out. I couldn't imagine that people's phones are going to fall out on a kid ride like that, but you never know these days, and it can be dangerous. It shouldn't be a joking matter actually, because I think it was only a few years ago that someone actually died underneath the Raptor, sneaking underneath to grab their phone. So safety is always the first, order of everything. It's not a laughing matter anymore, and yeah. So even though I generally think it's just a cool design to do, it actually has safety purposes as well, and I'm happy with it. And I actually think I added a second one when I finally remembered to put the queue path all the way to the edge of the park, which you might see here in a second, because here's where the roller coaster breaks. And breaks multiple times. Indeed, it does, because it took me a while to find that little path. And I actually opened up the park here as well, so you can finally see some people walking through it. I'm not entirely sure what the best way to like go about the videos are in terms of building and then letting it play a little bit and building, letting it play. I think we had started like $22,000, which seemed like a lot at the time, and it was actually a lot to let me build. But when I ate up almost all of it with like the building process, we were losing out on like $400 or $500 a month right away on ride costs and operations and paychecks for, I guess, payroll rather, for all of our employees. So definitely money is something that I'm going to have to improve on. That we'll just leave it at that. And I thought I was good at money, but apparently I am not the best person at managing the finances of an amusement park. And then I didn't think I'd say that, but we're on episode 2 and we've already struggled. I did take up 2 loans at the end of the park. I'm not entirely sure I needed them. I probably could have waited and just let the money stabilize a little bit. But I was really trying to hit those main 2 goals that we had. And I just figured that it would be better just to take out a loan, be safe than sorry. I'm not sure if the game resets, like if you run out of money and you just lose and have to start over. And I was really afraid of that. So that was like the main primary factor behind me taking those loans. But the second factor was I got to add a little bit more content. I added another ride or 2, and overall, I'm happy with the choice. The banks may not be, and the park management may not be, but at the end of the day, I'm happy with it, and that's what matters. And we passed the scenario. We actually were able to get both the primary goals as well as the optional goals. I think the primary goal was 200 guests in the park, or no, it was 250 guests in the park, and then the optional goals was to get that done by June of year 2, which is about a year and a half. And then the second goal was to sell 400 tickets. And so the ticket one, I thought that by the time we hit 250 guests, we'd hit about 400 tickets sold, because I figured by people leaving and stuff, that would be, it seemed like it would make sense. But we were at it, I think, about 330. So we had to sit around a little bit longer and collect those 400 tickets. And now we're getting to like probably one of the newer sections of the park. So I kind of talked about we had the old section that was there when they first opened up, and then as they fundraised a little bit more money and got a little bit more community backing, they opened up the newer section of the park, and that's when they added in some of these new rides and started to kind of go over the airfield. And I hope the patrons and the people were not upset about that. I would assume that they understand, because the majority of the airfield is still intact, but there's just a lack of space and city codes. The park can't buy very much land, and I think that's probably why they have some like the smaller coasters, which is probably primarily because of money and funds of the park. But I'm gonna guess it's probably city ordinances around the height limits, or at least we'll say, and that's why we can only go over about like 8.5 meters. I'm sure the buildings are actually probably taller than 8.5 meters, so we'll just to ourselves, that's the reason why they can't have any big coasters, and definitely not because the designer of the map only gave us these ones. But to be fair, the coasters that they did give us were pretty good selection, and I'm pretty happy with them. Another thing that we did differently on this go around was I tried to add a lot more greenery. I tried to make the park truly feel like you were immersed. Making sure that I was adding up walls in different sections to kind of subdivide the rides in the different sections of the park. Adding plenty of trees and bushes and shrubberies and flowers to really sell that the park is real. And I think it paid off pretty well. Especially when I do my final kind of pass after I stopped recording and was waiting on that 400 guest mark. So that final pass, you'll kind of see for a brief second when I show the ride POVs. But overall, the design of the park was really good. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we should be at the point where it was my favorite part of designing the park. And that was building the powered roller coaster. Originally, I thought that it was just like going to be a standard a steel coaster, and then we're gonna be able to do inversions and stuff, and that was gonna be pretty cool. And that's why I started off doing like my standard format, which is kind of like sinking down a little bit before going back up. But then I realized it was a power coaster. Now, while designing it, I didn't really know too much about power coasters. I thought that it might be similar to Maverick, which I kind of mentioned last episode was my favorite ride, but I had to take a pause and kind of go look, and they are really interesting rides. I have not personally ridden one, but they tend to be very thematic, either as dragons or mine train rides or things of that nature. But they're really unique coasters in the fact that they are powered the entire ride. So their tracks, I think you should be able to see it here, have a very unique kind of, I think it's a pull train. I'm not sure if it's just electric that boosts the car along. I'm not entirely sure like the engineering behind it, which I would love to look into because that seems really cool to me. And that's what I do for a living. But I really am intrigued with how this ride is designed. And I don't know if I did it entirely right. I used almost the entire like boosting on the initial lift and then let it coast for the rest of the ride. And that may not be the entirety of, or the entire point of the ride, but I do like how it's able to get a few looping elements in with very banked curves to give some fun, just some fun family elements to the ride, and then a couple just airtime hills at the end, which is very Millennium Force-ish. Maybe not as tall, definitely not as tall, but they're there for the fun elements, and then just a nice little loop around. I don't know if that last little kind of turn is a little. I'm not sure what the best word is. Best word to use for it is neck breaking. I mean, that doesn't seem very accurate, but jerky. Jerky might be the best word to use for it. It's a very jerky turn, and I hope it's not too bad. But it looks pretty smooth, especially in the ride POV later. And overall, I'm happy with this ride. And it made a lot of money because the stats for it were pretty good. I think it was like a 4 points or 45 on excitement. So I'm not entirely sure what the max stats are. Maybe 50? Maybe 50 is the highest. And if that's the case, I will take the stats that I got on this ride. I'm going to guess not. If I had to imagine, it was probably like 100. But we'll take the stats that we got. This part here, though, was really challenging because I probably should have left it like at a higher altitude so that I could actually fit the path underneath it and not have to cut into their airfield going underground for the Q path, but it worked out, and I didn't want to sacrifice the airtime hill at the end, and it all looks good. It was able to add some more hanger like metal siding to the underground part, and people love the ride. The queue line actually probably should have been longer because there was tons of people that got turned around just seeing how big the line was. Another interesting thing about that power coaster, which I should have thought about, and here's our confetti because, we celebrated the first, our first milestone achievement, was that it actually loops multiple times. And here I'm going to show some ride POVs, and you will see that. I did not know that. I didn't realize that the powered coasters were known for looping multiple times, and that just makes the poor line even longer. But, without further ado, let's hop right in. And as you can tell, like I said before, it is very much its own unique style of following the ride, and that's okay for the isometric perspective. I'm not sure if the artwork and the design choices that they made would really stand up with a first-person point of view. If there is one, let me know, but my guess is this is fine, and if you want to see these more, we can keep them, and if not, I'm fine with getting rid of them too. But while we are seeing the ride POVs and you are enjoying them, I just want to say that we're going to kind of continue this format on the channel. So I'm thinking about having these types of videos, which are going to be on like the longer sides, on Sundays. And then probably on Wednesdays, we're going to sprinkle in some other content that's not Parkitect. I'm not entirely sure what that is yet. I have a few ideas kind of baking right now. But if you have anything that you would love to see, please let me know. I'm thinking maybe doing some City Skylines and maybe League of Legends content. I know it's City Skylines probably a little bit closer. League of Legends maybe a little bit different. But that's the content and the ways that I'm going. And with that, I appreciate everybody watching this. Make sure to like and comment. And I will see you all on the next episode. Thanks again. See ya.